Before the blade ever touched her neck, Marie Antoinette had already been executed. Not by steel but by humiliation. Not by law but by hatred. Not in seconds but slowly, deliberately, day by day. Ending her life was not enough. Her identity had to be erased. Her dignity dismantled. Her suffering turned into public spectacle. France did not simply want her dead. France wanted her broken. This is not the myth of a reckless queen. This is the true story of what happened to Marie Antoinette before the guillotine claimed her life. Before the screams. Before the blade. Before history froze her into a caricature. This is the story of a woman destroyed in silence. Once, she had been the Archduchess of Austria, married at 14 and sent across borders to seal a political alliance she never chose. At Versailles, she was watched constantly. Every word recorded. Every gesture judged. She learned early that her life no longer belonged to her. Even her mournings were public, even her motherhood supervised. As France's finances collapsed and hunger spread through the streets, resentment needed a face. Pamphlets turned her into a monster. They called her the Austrian woman, a foreign parasite draining the nation dry. Lies spread faster than truth. The people no longer saw a person. They saw a symbol, and symbols must die loudly. On the night of August 2nd, 1793, while Paris slept under uneasy silence, guards entered her prison cell. There was no explanation. No merci. Marie Antoinette was torn from what remained of her family and dragged through dark corridors. She was taken to the Conciergerie, a damp, rotting prison known by Parisians as the waiting room of the guillotine. She was no longer a queen. She became prisoner number 280. Her cell was small, soaked with moisture. Water dripped constantly from the ceiling. Rats scurried freely. A pile of straw served as her bed. A single candle was her only light. 2 guards watched her every moment. She slept under their eyes. She dressed under their eyes. Even the illusion of privacy was denied. The surveillance was not about security. It was about humiliation. A daily reminder that she was no longer considered fully human. Time lost meaning. Days were measured by footsteps and dripping water. Outside, Paris roared with revolutionary fury. Inside, she withered in silence. But nothing broke her like the loss of her son. Only weeks earlier, guards had stormed her cell in the Temple prison past midnight. Marie Antoinette had thrown herself over the small body of Louis Charles, screaming that he was only a child. They tore her away anyway. The 8-year-old was dragged from her arms, crying, calling for his mother. She would never see him again. That night shattered her. Not the queen, but the mother. She hid a tiny portrait of him and a lock of his hair inside her clothing. It was all she had left. Her final connection to warmth in a world frozen by cruelty. Her only kindness came from a young servant named Rosalie. She later said the queen never cried for herself. She cried only when speaking of her children, whispering their names like prayers. Even this grief was mocked. Guards taunted her, laughed about her executed husband, insulted her day after day. They expected hysteria. They expected collapse. Instead, something unexpected happened. Marie Antoinette grew quieter, slower, still. Stripped of everything, she discovered a strange composure, a dignity that appears only when there is nothing left to lose. At a tea night, she stared at the candle flame and replayed her life, the palace gardens, her children's laughter, the moment when admiration turned into hatred, when people stopped seeing humans and began seeing enemies. 76 days passed like this. 76 dawns without hope. Then the cell door opened again. This time not to take a child, but to take her to trial. She was led through stone corridors, surrounded by soldiers. Her black mourning dress hung loosely from her thin frame. The courtroom was packed with spectators hungry for blood. It was not a trial. It was theater. Accusations poured out. Treason, conspiracy, corruption. None required proof. The verdict was already written. Then came the vilest charge of all. The prosecutor accused her of incest with her own son. The room froze. Louis Charles had been beaten, isolated, and coerced into signing a false confession. Words he could not understand were placed into his mouth to destroy his mother. Marie Antoinette stood slowly. She did not scream. She did not argue. She turned to the women in the crowd and said quietly, "I appeal to all mothers who are here." Nothing more was needed. For a moment the monster vanished. A mother stood in her place. The judges rushed forward. The moment was buried beneath procedure. The trial dragged on for 2 days. At dawn, the sentence was read. Death by guillotine. When asked if she had anything to add, she whispered, "What more could I say?" That night, back in her cell, she wrote her final letter. She forgave her enemies. She begged her sister-in-law to care for her daughter. She asked that her son never be blamed for what he had been forced to say. She wrote, "Tell him I do not blame him. I will always be his mother." The letter was confiscated and hidden for decades. At dawn, the guards returned. She was forced to change into a plain white gown. Her hair was cut brutally. Her hands were bound tightly with rope. Privacy was denied even for the most basic human needs. She did not protest. As she walked through the prison corridors, guards removed their hats without realizing why. Something in her demanded silence. She climbed into the open wooden cart reserved for criminals. The crowd hurled insults as she passed. She did not respond. She stood upright, silent, unbroken. Artists sketched her as she passed. Witnesses later said it was not arrogance they saw, but peace. When the guillotine came into view, she lifted her face to the sky. At the scaffold, she stumbled and stepped on the executioner's foot. She looked at him and said softly, "Forgive me, sir. I did not do it on purpose." Those were her last words. No es crime, no curse. Only grace. The blade fell. The crowd roared. Her body was thrown into a mass grave without ceremony. But history did not bury her. Years later, her remains were recovered and placed among kings. Her story transformed. Not into innocence, not into guilt, but into something far more enduring. A reminder that even when everything is stripped away, power, name, family, life, dignity can survive. The guillotine took her body. It never took her humanity. If the story stayed with you, share your thoughts below. History judged her loudly. Understanding her requires silence. What do you remember her as?